From the very beginning, the story of Saint Dominic of Guzman feels loaded with meaning. Born around 1170 in the small town of Calaruga, in Castile, he grew up in an environment shaped by faith and strong tradition. His parents, Felix de Guzman and Blessed Joan of Aza, were known for their devotion, and that deeply shaped his early years. Young Dominic quickly found a clear path to follow, a life dedicated to God. As a child, he was entrusted to the care of his uncle, Gonzalo de Aza, archpriest of Gumiel de Risson, where he received both education and moral formation. There, he showed an unusual attraction to the spiritual life, something that surprised everyone around him. Beyond his studies, several stories from his childhood fed the belief that Dominic had been chosen for something greater. One of the most famous comes from his mother, Joan, who dreamed of a dog leaping from her womb, holding a torch capable of setting the world on fire. That symbolic image would later become central to Dominican iconography. Another remarkable episode took place at his baptism. Witnesses claimed they saw a bright star shining above Dominic's head, interpreted as a sign that he would one day illuminate the paths of faith. Growing up surrounded by spirituality, discipline, and stories hinting at an extraordinary destiny, Dominic was shaped early on for a life of self-giving. His home, filled with devotion, and his strong religious formation from childhood prepared him for challenges that few would ever take on. When Dominic turned 14, his life took a major leap forward. He was sent to Palencia, at the time one of the greatest centers of learning in the kingdom, where he spent 10 years immersed in the study of arts, philosophy, and theology. Imagine a teenager who, instead of following the usual path of the time, devoted himself completely to knowledge. That dedication shaped not only his intelligence, but also his character and virtues. During those years, a defining event revealed the depth of his compassion. A severe famine struck the region, leaving countless families on the brink of misery. Moved by their suffering, Dominic made a radical decision. He sold his books and the few belongings he had to feed the hungry. Books back then were extremely valuable, the equivalent of months or even years of earnings. And it was at this moment that he said the line that echoed through history. "How can I study off dead skins while people are dying of hunger?" What kind of courage do you think it takes to make a choice like that? This gesture wasn't an isolated act, but a true reflection of who Dominic was. His life as a student wasn't just about academic learning. It was intertwined with charity, discipline, and a deep spiritual responsibility. He didn't seek knowledge just to know more. He wanted to turn it into service. At the end of his studies, Dominic took the next step in his vocation. He became a priest. His maturity, character, and dedication led to his rapid election as sub-prior of the Cathedral of Osma in 1196. It was an important position, and he carried it out with humility and firmness. Even while still young, Dominic wasn't interested in prestige. He was looking for opportunities to serve more and serve better. In the early 1200s, Dominic received an unexpected mission, accompanying Bishop Diego to Denmark to negotiate the marriage of the Castilian crown prince. At first glance, it seemed like a simple diplomatic trip with little spiritual relevance. But, as often happens in the lives of saints, something that appeared ordinary would become a turning point. Along the journey, Dominic and the bishop passed through regions in northern Europe where they encountered populations who were barely instructed in the faith. It shocked Dominic to see how many people knew almost nothing about Christianity's basic teachings. This experience stirred him deeply. It wasn't just religious ignorance. It was a profound thirst for meaning, truth, and hope. As they traveled, it became clear to him that evangelizing wasn't simply teaching doctrine. It meant bringing light to hearts living in spiritual darkness. Seeing entire communities far from the faith awakened in him a desire to dedicate his life to taking the gospel wherever it was needed. That trip also shaped his approach to the growing heresies spreading across Europe. Witnessing how spiritual ignorance left people vulnerable to confusion made Dominic understand that combating error wasn't about debating ideas. It was about protecting souls. This new perspective would become crucial in his mission against Catharism, which he would soon face. When Dominic returned from that mission, he was no longer the same. The journey, which had begun as a political assignment, had become a revelation of the urgent need for evangelization. It was there that his missionary calling gained clarity and direction. And this inner awakening would lead him to one of the greatest challenges of his life, confronting the Albigensian heresy in southern France. When Dominic arrived in southern France, he found a situation that would change the course of his life: the rise of Catharism, also known as the Albigensian heresy. This dualist movement attracted crowds, especially because its leaders lived austere, disciplined lives, a sharp contrast to many church representatives of the time. Dominic quickly realized that preaching the truth wasn't enough; it had to be lived with authenticity. Watching the situation up close, Dominic concluded that the real problem wasn't just the ideas taught by the Albigensians, but the lack of credibility among Catholic preachers. Luxury, showiness, and shallow teaching had pushed people away and opened the door for simpler, more radical messages. Dominic understood that winning hearts back meant returning to a gospel lived with integrity. Without hesitation, he embraced a radically poor, penitential lifestyle and devoted himself to deep study. Dominic preached on foot, without guards, wealth, or privileges. His message was simple, direct, and accessible, the exact opposite of the heavy, distant preaching style common at the time. He joined public debates with Cathar leaders, relying more on the power of a life lived in truth than on aggressive arguments. But this approach came at a cost. Dominic faced insults, physical aggression, and intimidation attempts. Even so, he never backed down. His courage turned him into a bright point of hope in a region marked by tension and spiritual conflict. His commitment became so evident that he was offered the position of bishop 3 different times and refused all 3. He knew his calling wasn't tied to a throne or an office, but to the road, to itinerant preaching, and to direct contact with the people. He chose to remain simple, free, and completely available for evangelization. Amid the tense atmosphere in southern France, Dominic realized something essential. To heal a region wounded by Catharism, he also needed to care for its most vulnerable souls. Among them were many women who, deceived by Cathar promises, had abandoned the Catholic faith. With patience and sincere dialogue, Dominic touched their hearts and guided them back to Christianity. But once they returned to the faith, Dominic understood that these women needed more than spiritual guidance. They needed a home, stability, and a safe place to rebuild their lives. So in 1206, he founded a women's community in Prouille, the first stable institution connected to what would later become the Order of Preachers, the Dominican order. It's inspiring to see how he wasn't focused only on big theological disputes, but also on the concrete needs of the people right in front of him. The choice of Prouille was no accident. Located in a region heavily influenced by Catharism, the new monastery became a true beacon of light in the spiritual confusion of the time. There, the women received formation, support, and, above all, a renewed opportunity to live the faith deeply. For Dominic, this community was more than just a physical refuge. He saw Prouille as the spiritual heart of his mission. While he and his future friars preached on the roads, the nuns sustained the entire work with constant prayer, fasting, and intercession. It was a complementary partnership, action and contemplation united to face an enormous challenge. According to tradition, one of the most striking moments in the life of Saint Dominic took place in Toulouse during a period of intense prayer and penance. Faced with the difficulty of converting the Albigensians, Dominic withdrew into deep supplication, begging God for a solution. It was then, according to the accounts, that the Virgin Mary appeared to him, holding the Rosary, known at the time as the Angelic Psalter. She presented it as the spiritual weapon that would change the direction of his mission. After this vision, Dominic began preaching the Rosary as a path of conversion and a defense of the faith. And according to countless early testimonies, something extraordinary happened. Crowds began embracing the devotion with great fervor, and massive conversions spread across the region. His preaching gained new strength, simplicity, and remarkable effectiveness. Popular accounts also describe miraculous episodes linked to these preachings. On one occasion, while Dominic was speaking to the people, a violent storm suddenly broke out, accompanied by tremors and frightening lightning. After he prayed the Rosary, everything stopped instantly. In another story, a statue of the Virgin Mary is said to have raised its arms 3 times, calling for justice and conversion. But there is also the historical perspective, and it adds important nuance. Scholars affirm that the Rosary already existed before Saint Dominic, and that its current structure, with organized mysteries, would only be developed centuries later, especially thanks to the Dominican Alain de la Roche in the 15th century. Even so, no one doubts Dominic's central role. He was the great promoter of this devotion and the one who made it known and accessible to the people. Among the most striking accounts of Saint Dominic's life, the episode at Carcassonne holds a special place. During a sermon that gathered around 12,000 people, Dominic was preaching with zeal about the power of the Rosary. In the middle of the crowd, they brought him an Albigensian man said to be possessed by a legion of demons. The scene shocked everyone and brought total silence. Dominic, remaining completely calm, placed the Rosary around the possessed man's neck and began an intense prayer. It was then that the demons, forced by the authority of prayer and by the name of Mary, began to reveal what they would never willingly admit. Amid screams and resistance, they confessed that they deeply feared the Rosary because it destroys their works and protects those who pray it with perseverance. As the prayer continued, the demons revealed even more. They claimed to hate Dominic because he pulled countless souls from hell through his preaching. They said that no faithful devotee of the Rosary is ever lost, and they admitted that Mary, by God's grace, is invincible against them. These statements, though coming from tormented voices, only strengthened the people's belief in the Rosary's spiritual power. The climax came when, according to the traditional account, the Virgin Mary herself appeared, surrounded by angels, and commanded the demons to tell the whole truth. Her presence filled the evil spirits with terror and the crowd with awe. From that moment on, the people were even more convinced of Mary's powerful intercession and of Dominic's mission. Episodes like this show how faith can gain extraordinary strength through experiences that go far beyond human logic. This event in Carcassonne forever strengthened the bond between Dominic, the Rosary, and Marian devotion. The story spread quickly among Christian communities, inspiring conversions and increasing confidence in prayer. After years of facing Catholicism and dedicating himself to forming communities of faith, Dominic realized his mission needed stronger foundations. So in 1215, he gathered in Toulouse a small group of men who shared the same ideal: to evangelize with clarity, simplicity, and exemplary lives. This group of preachers became the seed of the future order of preachers. As the community grew, the need for official recognition from the Church became clear. Dominic decided to travel to Rome to take part in the Fourth Lateran Council, one of the most important gatherings of the time. There, he presented his project to Pope Innocent III, who, despite recognizing its value, advised Dominic to adopt an existing rule, a way to ensure stability and legitimacy. Dominic accepted the council with humility and chose the rule of St. Augustine, known for balancing community life, prayer, and apostolic ministry. From it, he organized a way of life that united deep study, spiritual discipline, and total dedication to preaching. This flexibility allowed the group to grow without losing its missionary heart. On December 22, 1216, the long-awaited answer finally arrived. Pope Honorius III officially approved the Order of Preachers. Thus was born the Dominican Order, named not because Dominic sought honors, but because its members would become the Lord's watchdogs, vigilant guardians of the faith, echoing the ancient symbol from his mother's dream. Papal approval wasn't just a title. It was the recognition of a living mission already transforming entire communities. With the official approval of the Order of Preachers, Dominic didn't waste time. His goal was never to form a closed group, but to create a missionary force capable of reaching all of Europe. So he immediately sent his first friars to strategic centers: Paris, Spain, Rome, and Bologna. Each destination was chosen carefully, based on where a Dominican presence could bring the greatest impact. These cities had something in common. They were major university hubs. Dominic, who always valued study as the foundation of preaching, knew that to combat heresies and guide the people, his friars needed solid formation. Because of this, the first convents arose beside great universities, becoming true centers of study and evangelization. This intellectual identity quickly became a hallmark of the Dominicans. They studied, debated, wrote, and prepared themselves to preach with clarity wherever they were sent. This transformed the order into an institution deeply rooted in the academic world and respected for its doctrinal competence. It's interesting to think that Dominic, who once sold his own books to help the poor, founded an order that would later become a global reference in teaching and theology. In the years that followed, the order grew with astonishing speed. In 1220 and 1221, Dominic gathered his friars in Bologna for the first 2 general chapters, meetings designed to organize rules, shape the mission, and strengthen unity among the Dominican houses. These assemblies established the democratic structure that would become one of the order's defining features. Decisions made together, always prioritizing the common good. Throughout this process, Dominic naturally assumed the role of master of the order, guiding his friars with love, firmness, and remarkable spiritual insight. He traveled constantly, visited communities, preached tirelessly, and encouraged every brother to serve with joy. Even when exhausted, Dominic never abandoned his mission. Looking at the personal life of Saint Dominic, we find someone profoundly marked by austerity. His daily routine was extremely rigorous. He did not eat meat, fasted often, walked long distances barefoot, and slept on the floor. For him, every sacrifice was a way to unite himself more deeply to Christ and strengthen his mission. Despite such demanding penances, Dominic was not a sad or withdrawn man. On the contrary, he was known for his joy and quiet sense of humor, which often encouraged his friars during difficult times. His humility shone through in every gesture, especially in the way he approached the poor, always ready to listen, help, and console. One of his most remarkable virtues was his deep love for the Word of God. Dominic carried with him, everywhere he went, the Gospel of St. Matthew and the letters of St. Paul, his inseparable companions. He believed that a preacher could only transform lives if he was firmly rooted in Scripture. This devotion shaped his preaching style, simple, direct, and nourished by biblical truth. Descriptions left by witnesses of the time reveal details that make Dominic feel surprisingly close to us. He was described as a man with a handsome face and a serene expression, with bright eyes that conveyed peace. His voice was pleasant and clear, making it easy for him to preach even before crowds. He had slightly reddish hair and beard, an uncommon feature that drew attention. In the final months of his life, Saint Dominic was already showing signs of extreme physical exhaustion. After years of traveling, preaching, and guiding his order with deep zeal, his body could no longer keep up with his tireless spirit. In Bologna, where he spent long periods assisting the friars, he became ill and was taken to the convent of San Nicolo. Even in weakness, Dominic kept the serenity and joy that had always defined him. As his health declined, Dominic insisted on staying among his brothers, refusing privileges and asking only to die in a simple place, just as he had lived. On August 6, 1221, around midday, he surrendered his soul to God, surrounded by the friars he loved so dearly. His final words were an invitation to charity, humility, and voluntary poverty, the very pillars that had shaped his entire life. After his death, Dominic was buried in the convent of San Nicolo, a place that would eventually become the present-day Basilica of Saint Dominic. There, his spiritual presence began drawing pilgrims from all over Europe. Testimonies of graces received multiplied quickly, revealing how His Holiness continued to touch lives even after his passing. His reputation for holiness was so strong and so undeniable that only 13 years later, in 1234, Pope Gregory IX, who had personally known him and admired his wisdom and sanctity, canonized him. It was not merely an honor for the founder of an order, but the recognition of a life completely dedicated to proclaiming the truth. Over the centuries, the relics of Saint Dominic were transferred several times until they finally received their definitive resting place in the magnificent Ark of Saint Dominic, sculpted by Nicola Pisano, one of the most beautiful works of the medieval period. This ark became a symbol of the reverence and love that generations have shown toward this great saint. Over the centuries, Saint Dominic became one of the most beloved figures in Christian spirituality. His influence reached far beyond the order of preachers, touching entire cultures that began to invoke him as a protector in many needs. He is recognized as the patron of astronomers and scientists, a symbol of someone who sought truth with depth, discipline, and an open mind. He is also patron of those unjustly accused, reflecting his life dedicated to defending truth and justice. His protection extends to peoples and cities as well. The very name of the Dominican Republic is a direct tribute to the Dominicans, showing how the order's missionary presence profoundly shaped the country's history. Cities like Bologna, Madrid, Córdoba, Valletta, and many others honor him as their patron, celebrating him with festivities that blend faith, culture, and tradition. In art, Saint Dominic is often shown surrounded by symbols that highlight his mission and identity. One of the most iconic is the star on his forehead, a reminder of the light that, according to tradition, shone at his baptism. Another is the famous dog carrying a torch, an image tied to his mother's dream and to the play on words Domini Canis, the Lord's watchdog, symbolizing the preacher who carries the light of the gospel into the world. These symbols make his figure instantly recognizable. Other common elements in his iconography reinforce his virtues and mission. The Rosary, linked to the Marian devotion he spread. The Bible, his preferred tool for preaching. The lily, symbolizing purity. And the patriarchal cross, often associated with founders of great religious orders. And of course, his Dominican habit, the white tunic with the black cloak, became one of the most iconic religious garments in the Church's history. His memory is celebrated worldwide on different dates. The main feast is August 8th in the Catholic Church's liturgical calendar. In the traditional rite, it falls on August 4th. There are also special commemorations tied to the translation of his relics, honored with local devotion in various countries. These celebrations keep Saint Dominic's spiritual presence alive and remind us of the greatness of someone who united contemplation, mission, and love for the truth. When we look at Saint Dominic's impact through the centuries, it becomes clear that his legacy goes far beyond his lifetime. He founded the Order of Preachers, one of the most influential institutions in the history of the Church. The Dominicans spread across the world with a clear mission to proclaim the truth with love, intelligence, and fidelity to the gospel. This combination placed the order at the center of major theological debates, missionary efforts, universities, and spiritual movements that deeply shaped Christianity. Among Dominic's strongest marks is his love for study. He believed that seeking the truth was a pathway to God, and this vision formed extraordinary theologians, especially St. Thomas Aquinas, considered one of the greatest thinkers in human history. Dominican theology became a global standard, influencing universities, councils, and entire schools of thought. The lifestyle Dominic proposed, a unique combination of charity, poverty, and study, helped inspire the rise of other mendicant orders, especially the Franciscans. At a time when medieval society struggled with abuses, inequality, and doctrinal confusion, the simple and authentic way of living and preaching embraced by these religious men offered an effective and deeply evangelical answer. The spiritual renewal that began with Dominic helped restore balance to the Church. His legacy also expanded beyond the religious world into the cultural sphere. One of the most striking testimonies appears in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. In Paradiso, Dante portrays Dominic as one of the two pillars supporting the Church alongside Saint Francis of Assisi, a powerful symbol of the spiritual and intellectual strength they represented in the Middle Ages. This image helped entire generations grasp the greatness of Dominic's mission. Even in modern popular culture, Dominic left his mark. In 1963, the song Dominique, composed by the Belgian nun Sir Sourayer, the singing nun, became an international hit, reaching #1 on the charts in the United States. The song introduced his story to thousands of people who might never have heard of him otherwise. It's proof that the life of a saint can cross centuries and find new ways to touch hearts. Before we move to the final prayer, it's important to pause, a moment to breathe and truly absorb everything we have seen about Saint Dominic. After so many events, stories, and signs of grace, it's worth closing your eyes for a moment and imagining this man walking the roads of medieval Europe, poor, barefoot, carrying a gospel book in his hands and an intense desire to save souls in his heart. That same missionary fire crossed centuries and reaches us today as a quiet invitation to seek the truth, live with purpose, and trust wholeheartedly in God's protection. And with that spirit, I invite you now to pray with me. letting this prayer find a real place within you and shine light on your next steps. Saint Dominic of Guzman, Holy Master and tireless preacher, intercede for us in this moment. Teach us to love the truth as you loved it, to seek light even in times of darkness, and to face difficulties with humility and courage. May we live with free hearts, attentive to God's call, and committed to doing good. Lead us to wisdom, strengthen us in faith, and inspire us to serve with joy. May your devotion to the Word and to the Virgin Mary guide us today and always, helping our steps lead us closer to Christ. Amen. And before we close this video, I want to speak directly to you, the one who stayed with us until the end. If the life of Saint Dominic inspired you, moved you, or even sparked a meaningful reflection, don't forget to leave your like. It helps the channel reach far more people. If you'd like to support our work and gain access to exclusive content, consider becoming a member. And of course, comment below, which moment from Saint Dominic's story touched you the most? Your interaction helps strengthen our community. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. In fact, we've already left a special recommendation on the final screen that connects beautifully with today's topic. Click there and continue this journey with us.